Hello, everyone. This is Shred's Takes. I'm here with Alex Brodsky. He played basketball in New Jersey in high school, but also he played at Binghamton, and then he just finished up a little bit. He's trying to still figure out what his next path is, but he just played basketball up in Luxembourg, and he has a pretty interesting basketball story. So he'll definitely share a lot of this today on the podcast. But Alex, thank you for joining the show, and I really appreciate having you on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So let's start in with just the basics, right? Just you know, talk about like high school to Binghamton, right? Again, for those who don't know, right? You graduated, you did your MBA there, but talk a little bit about just kind of going from high school and then deciding to be a part of the Binghamton basketball team, kind of where that started, and what made you decide to talk about the path basically to be at Binghamton for that standpoint.
Yeah, I'm trying to condense it because it'd be a super long story. But yeah, I went to Stevens first in Hoboken. I played Division 3 first, and then I was at Nyack College actually again. So I sort of had played every division, to an extent. Should I start in like high school? Would that be best to like
Yeah,
get
that'd be
into it?
best, I would say.
So I guess yeah. So I went to Dwight Englewood. Not really a basketball school at all. I'm not known for that. Pretty much like Saturday Day, like other schools, more of just an academic focused, private school. My right when I got there, they started recruiting and they really overhauled the entire basketball program. My first years, I played freshman JV. As a junior, I pretty much played JV also, which is when you want to play in college, obviously, makes things pretty difficult. Sat a little bit varsity my junior year. We had a good year. And then my senior year, a lot of kids had transferred out, which gave me an opportunity to play a lot there. It was just I don't want to, rip any schools or anything, but just the way Dwight was ran, we had a lot of overhaul, a lot of guys coming in and out, coaches moving. We had a ton of different coaches, a lot of kids rotating in. It was pretty much like a revolving door. A lot of talent there. If you were to condense it, we had a lot of kids who ended up playing, deemed to college, and a few who, beyond that. But yeah, overall, going to my senior year, I had a pretty. Or I guess I could start with the junior summer. So I wanted to play in college. So I went to a bunch of those Ivy camps. I think I probably had seen you at one or two of them, like Yale, Columbia, the whole rundown. I wanted to play AAU, but no one would really take me on to play AAU because I didn't play much in high school at the time as a junior. So I played for, Ring City with like NJ Drive back then. Um,
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
yeah, I don't know if they're even still a partner at this point, but I played on their C team actually when I was that 17U, like big AAU summer. We didn't play like in any real tournaments or anything like that, but like just do a little bit of film out. My dad would come with like an iPad and try to record some of the games to try to send to schools. I went to a bunch of the camps and then got a little bit of Division 3 interest. I went to Stevens. That was like the best fit for me academically. Senior year, I played half of the year. I had a pretty good year. Right before we actually played you guys in the Jamboree, that was like I stopped playing like maybe a week before that. So I was at that game and I remember you played well. Just funny, full circle moment. And then from there, yeah, I go to Stevens, played my freshman year, got cut. Um, I don't. Did your school do that a lot? Would they bring in like a ton of kids? Would anyone get cut, or how did it work? At your school?
I wouldn't say. I mean, generally, we didn't really have a whole lot of walk-on tryouts. I mean, like my first 2 years, we had I think two walk-ons. Last 2 years, I mean, we just had a lot of recruits coming anyway, and a lot of guys returned because guys took gap years during COVID. So it like including
Interesting.
myself. So I just graduated this past year, and I was supposed to graduate in 2022. So like, it was a little different from that standpoint, just because like we had like 17 guys already like put on the team based on just guys who kept staying returned, obviously. So,
Yeah.
and then you have, the recruiting classes coming in. So it was a little different, but I've heard like that story from other people. It's just like we had 17 guys already. So I think we were kind of set.
Yeah, no, it's funny. We had like 20 my first year. These were all kids recruited after your first year. It's sort of like, like I guess I didn't last up until so I was recruited and then they were my first year, and then from there, that was sort of the end of it for me. But yeah, so after I got cut from Stevens, which is, sort of like, I stopped playing basketball for a little while, and then I had played on a very good AAU team actually the summer before going into my freshman year of college. I played for New York Lightning with the Nike IBL, and then I had known Dana since I was a little kid. Once I committed to Stevens, yeah, I'm sort of bouncing around a little, but he allowed me to work out with him at first, and I made the team and play with them. So we kept in contact, and that was a cool experience. So he helped me, and pretty much every day I would just email. That's how I got to Binghamton. I would email schools starting December, maybe like 28th, 30th, literally till August. Every single day I sent, I think it was around 3,000 emails over the course of that year. So however you chopped it up, like per day is pretty much what I would do. I would just like, I would go on LinkedIn, I would go on Twitter, I'd go on any means you possibly could. I'd call these guys, and I annoyed a lot of these coaches. And which looking back on it probably wasn't the best route, but I really wanted to play somewhere, and I tried playing Division 3 again, and no one really would give me a chance Division 3 wise. So I thought like it was a little delusional, but I thought maybe if I try to get somewhere as a walk on, maybe that'd be a cool experience, allow me to play again. I could with Binghamton, what happened was it pretty much went into the summer, so I didn't have any schools. Like I would have some that would tell me come try out maybe or whatever for the process there. And then for Binghamton, they had a few kids who left the team, some had passed away. They had like a very uh, crazy roster situation. So I'd reached out to them so many times, and probably by like maybe the seventh conversation we had where they said no to me, they finally had an opening. And I sort of had a mindset where someone was going to take me. If I had to show up, I showed up at Fordham and I worked out at Fordham. I would just go to every single school like that I could drive to and physically go there. Like I just sort of had like a mentality where someone would eventually, hopefully, take me in. And that's how I got to Binghamton in the first place.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of interesting because people think about that for like the job circle, right? Like you're applying to so many jobs, like you're talking about LinkedIn, and like basically that's becomes a lot of people's like best friends because in a sense from the college recruiting standpoint, I can even speak about like I was a Division 3 player, right? And I tried to go to the Ivy League route at first, and due to the fact of just a lack of a jump shot and probably the fact that I wasn't 6'10" and they wanted me to be more of a 4, things didn't happen. And I think it worked out, honestly, probably better for me anyway, just because you kind of got an appreciation, I think, of just like the whole college experience, I think, where I went. But and I think playing Division 1 basketball is great also, just because that was a dream of mine, and I always admire people who could go that road, even to walk on. But I think like what's interesting about your story too is like you can kind of talk about this kind of transferring over to play pro. Is it what like your work ethic and I think your diligence doesn't just go from just that to Binghamton. It like also you kind of like developed it through, I think, also just bouncing around in the corporate world a little bit, and then eventually kind of finding your way to a position in Luxembourg, and, which is kind of interesting because people would be saying there. I think that like be saying there and saying, well, there's guys who are like, I think it was like the guy Matt Ryan who's in the NBA, was a DoorDash driver and then got picked up in the G League and then was on the Lakers for a little bit. Like it's kind of like in a sense not the same thing, but like a similar kind of path. But just kind of talk about that for a standpoint of just kind of going from like the corporate path to pro, and how that experience at Binghamton maybe helped that out a little bit.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So I stayed at Binghamton obviously the 3 years. I got my MBA there. I was really hoping to play. I developed there basketball wise, but obviously, I didn't succeed in that aspect. But the school you were at, obviously Williams and Amherst, those are the two. You're at like the Duke of Division 3 basketball. I grew up. I wanted to go to Amherst when I was younger, and interest wasn't mutual, obviously. So that's what led me to Stevens. But yeah, like so when I was in Binghamton, I would intern during the summers. The coaches and stuff were pretty flexible with that. I worked one year in the athletic department because I wanted to be involved with that at first, and they were really helpful. And the other thing as to why I stayed at Binghamton, as long as I did, was, well, I had a lot of fun there. Like I really liked my friends there. It was a great setup. It was a lot of fun, and obviously lost a lot with COVID, and I had a red shirt, so I didn't really get the full experience until my last year. But yeah, I would intern, at various places. That's still obviously the goal of, I don't see myself ever, I'm not, it's be sort of realistic with where you're going to be basketball wise. But I've interned like in a finance position, just sort of in a wide range. I did like this own company with kids back home at school a little bit with in the IL space. I thought that would go a lot bigger than it ended up going, but just trying to get involved with a few different, I guess just feels to see what I would like to do. Did you intern at a bunch of places, I imagine, during your time at?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like when I was at Amherst, I switched career paths. So I went from wanting to go into finance to going like the sports media management route. I would say it was more sports media. So it's interesting. Like I interned at like during COVID was basically like the big year of internships. I did like public relations internship, podcast internship, like writing internships, all this stuff. And it was pretty cool because that kind of generally I knew I needed more experience in that realm, and that's ultimately where so you went from there, right? And now what kind of opened up the pro path? Because from that, I'm just asking because I'm saying that that's just interesting kind of just be like, all right, now I'm playing pro over in Luxembourg.
Yeah, so this part I'm gonna try to condense because this is the crazy part of sort of happened. So I graduated from Binghamton. I got my MBA. I had really 1 or 2 years left to play because my sophomore year I didn't play at all. I played like intramurals at Stevens. I didn't play like basketball like on a team or anything. So when you're a walk on, like there's a stigma, like you want to get a scholarship, and I felt that when I was there, like I had proved myself I could play. So I wanted to go to Division 2. I didn't have any more money left over for college. So I got a scholarship to NIAC and I wanted to go there, like chip my shoulder, like I want to now, I'm not a walk on, now I'm a scholarship guy, in quotes. So I go to NIAC, great place. That was the first school that ever offered me. So this is the beginning of this past calendar year, 22, 23. They moved the campus to Jersey City. They had financial issues. It got to a point where I was commuting 4 or 5 hours a day just to get there, practice back, practice back. I wasn't sleeping at night, sleep during the day. Very hard way to exist like that. So I stopped playing basketball, looking to get a regular job, just, sort of be done with this whole thing. By like November, I still the itch to play again, as I'm sure now that you're done playing basketball, it's hard, to like fully, cut it, you're doing your entire life. So I was like, whatever, let me see if I could go somewhere mid-year. So I had a few opportunities. One was an HBCU in Georgia I was considering going to play at. Ultimately, I went to Israel and got my citizenship there at first, which I know a bunch of kids in Bergen County, I'm sure over the years have done, sort of like a loophole to get overseas. And I knew a guy growing up who was sort of like an agent, quote unquote, like in that space. So I go out to Israel in February. It took a few like months to get the paperwork. I was working an accounting job, sort of like, just bouncing around doing that, doing the NIL stuff still, and working for my friend's internship. My friend is a startup, so I was sort of involved with that a little bit as well. And then I got out to Israel and turned down the college stuff because I got out there in February, and it's a lot of paperwork, a lot of bureaucracy that you got to deal with there with the government. And I didn't get cleared in time to play. So I get out there in February and I'm sitting in a hotel in Israel for about 2 weeks. I don't know anyone. I don't have a gym to work out in. My like quote unquote agent wasn't really very responsive when I was there. He worked with another guy in Israel, just a disaster. So I only worked out for 1 or 2 teams and they were like, one of them was pretty much near the Gaza Strip and like I couldn't even get signed anyway. So just a disaster after this entire year of like trying to play, wasting so much time. So to make a long story short, whatever, like I just was there, met a few people, whatever. I come home, and I just start emailing teams the same thing of what I did before. And I looked up leagues that had like a lot of small college guys, or guys who didn't like kill it, big schools, wherever the case may be. Emailed, I would translate the messages to like different languages, like and write like a whole thing on a Facebook. And by this point, like everyone in my family was like, this is now crazy, this is like February, there's, like I don't understand what just happened. And the way it worked out in Luxembourg was I was itching to play in this league called TBL. I had a few teams that were interested there. It's like sort of like the third division, quote unquote, with like after the G League. It's pretty well structured in some parts of the country. You have a lot of guys who could play who go to that. So with Luxembourg, what happened was, sort of to backtrack a little bit, I got to say one quick point before that. So when I was in Israel, I met these guys who were running a fourth division team in Israel, which is obviously not the highest level in the world. I didn't have a place to live, so they took me in for about 2 or 3 days. I think I stayed with them. Super nice guys, involved with the whole Israeli basketball scene. So they told me like you're not going to get cleared. Practice with them. So that was the whole basketball stint I had. That's like all the stats I really had because at Binghamton I had like walk-on numbers, which is not doesn't really translate too well. And professionally speaking, which I've learned, from doing this is that it's better to go to, I never really like wanted to go overseas in the first place. Like I didn't really sort of just like stumbled into it, but it's better to put up numbers, obviously, at a smaller college level, to where you have a lot more film and stuff. But whatever. So, so I read to these teams. I was like I'll pay for my flight, whatever. I'll get out there. I literally pretty much said like I'll play for free. I just wanted an opportunity at this point to play basketball. I didn't care where it was. I would have played at that fourth division if I was eligible. I just wanted to play. Like after waiting that long, it could have been I could have been playing like in like a 80-year-old division, or like anything. I just wanted to play basketball at that point. And So basically what happened was this team in Luxembourg, they had cut. So I thought they were in the third division, and the third division of Luxembourg is like there's no Americans coming in. It's pretty much just like the local Luxembourg guys, not super high level. Luxembourg is a small country as it is. So the second division, I had a few friends who had played in that. That's a lot of guys who like played a lot Division One or two schools, or if they were at a D3, they're like, a big dude there, obviously, and stuff. So I didn't have stats. So I just got super lucky basically where one team out of the 300 I reached out to said they had cut an American right before me. The backup guy they were supposed to bring in, who they literally spoke to right before I emailed them or Facebook messaged them, his son got in some accident or something. So like some freak scenario where they just needed someone. So they said like, you're our second option. If this other guy, another guy who was like a real freshman guy who had played Division One, been there for a few years, he couldn't get out there. So I pretty much wrote to them like, I kept on writing to the guy. I'm like, I'm in shape. I'm ready to go. Like, I'll fly out. I'll pay for my own thing. So finally, he writes to me like, yeah, you can come out. So like the next day, I flew out there, used a little bit of money I had, and then yeah, that was sort of how I got there. I got paid once I got out there, but it took a little while to like progress to that. But that was sort of how someone in my position was able to get an opportunity. Really,
I think that's just interesting because again, I think that what this also kind of translates to is just like the idea of some people, like people can learn the idea of just kind of just sticking to your guts in a sense, and also just having that own self confidence. Because if you think about it, right, like you could have just been like, all right, after those couple, rejections and stuff like that. I mean, you could have just been saying no, like I don't have maybe what it takes, but you kind of, in a sense, you had like a chip on your shoulder, like, hey, look, I'm going to go market myself and try to develop, a chance to get an opportunity, right? And I think that's really cool. And I think in a sense because that just shows in a sense like that's going to just not just help you for here, but like that's going to help you going forward because you I had to really be patient in your approach, which I think is very difficult to do, especially just the fact that we're young guys, we're not always the most patient.
exactly.
So I think that's kind of interesting to think about, right? I mean, you talk about that for a sense, like kind of keeping that internal confidence with yourself, despite and look, there's things that worked out successfully with you, and there's things that didn't, but you stayed confident within it, and kind of how'd you like where did that come from? Did that just come from your experience, just generally, or like did you always kind of have that? Because I think that for me, I developed that kind of more. I was in college because I think college you have to be you're not the man necessarily because everyone was the man that goes to college, and I at least at Division 3 level, and I think that was something like I had to like learn because I had to be like, okay, I got to put this much work in and stay confident of myself in order to make sure that I'm getting the best out of my game and the best out of my teammates. I think that's interesting to kind of talk about that, from standpoint of just talk about your self confidence, kind of staying, diligent in your approach.
No, it's a great question. Yeah, so like growing up, I didn't have, especially basketball, was definitely on the lower end there. I think also what really trained me was I didn't enjoy it at the time, but at Dwight, pretty much you're in a situation where you're like a walk on. So like or you're really pretty much playing in a screwed up way. It's like playing at a college because like with recruiting, I'm sure at Amherst, you have a lot of kids in America. Everyone who's a high academic kid, wants to play at that level. So the pool is huge. So like every year there's someone coming in to, replace you pretty much. That's what it was at Dwight. And on top of that, I was never even really considered to be like in the plan. I just sort of stayed there and I got lucky my last year. But yeah, like it creates like an uneasiness because I remember we played some fall league game and like the head coach at the time was like, he saw some kid in the crowd who was like his older brother played, and the kid was there the next week, and he could really play. So like that's just like they would have so many kids show up at open gyms like every single week, pretty much. And the plan was never like Alex Brodsky, you're gonna ever get a chance here. I just worked because of what I wanted to play basketball, and I knew this is like it's a sink or swim mentality. Like if I don't want to play, I could just stop working and I could sit at Dwight and then I could go to regular school and just be done with this. But yeah, I sort of just had that mentality that like, especially once I knew I could play, like I knew I got screwed at Stevens where I wasn't really given an opportunity and whatever, like there are some kids that happens to. But yeah, it's hard to explain. Like I just like, I knew if my whole thing was like going through this process and sort of at every step of the way, if everyone, my goal was for every coach in America to reject me. Like if every single coach said no to me, I could be cool with that. Like, okay, it's not meant to be, but I don't really like, I can't make an inference if I email you and you don't respond. I don't know, like, if you're even reading it, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I rather you like face to face say to me, like, Alex, like, no, I don't like you. I don't think you play this level. Like, leave me alone, like, piss off. Like, that's cool with me. But, so yeah, that was like my whole plan, I guess, with this whole thing. And once it worked out, I got to Binghamton. It was kind of weird because I was like, I didn't even play on a team for a year. And when I was at Stevens, I was like, not, I was like filming the practices. Like, I was not getting any reps there. We didn't have a team manager. So, like, I literally would do some of those duties with the other freshmen. So, yeah, that once you're there and you just like put up with BS, I think it's like, anything in life, you start to like get better. And so that's what happened to me at like Binghamton. Like I learned how to play basketball. I was playing in a program where, they gave me opportunities and I just learned how to play correctly. So, it gave me confidence when I left. I knew I could, if I could hang with those guys, I knew I'd be good, on my own, getting an opportunity somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's just incredible. I mean, I think obviously when you first reached out and talk about the Basil story, like for me, I always like kind of hearing that kind of stuff because I think it brings more of a humanistic appeal to the athletes themselves. You kind of when you hear a lot of the athletes, you just think about the statistics they put up or like the whatever, and I think just like kind of like the journey of getting there, I think a lot of people miss out on, and I think that's just awesome that again, like hopefully it continues to still go for you, right? I mean, I think that's the cool thing about it, right? Is that you went through trials and tribulations, and now you're developing that confidence to be able to get to the point where you're like, hey, look, maybe I can continue this for a few years, but if not, I have like the skill sets to be able to transfer it over to something else successfully, which I think is really cool. But I also wanted to say, like, I really appreciate you coming on to the podcast. Like this was an incredible story, and I definitely would love to have you on again at some point. Depending on obviously not just where your future progresses, but also just if I ever just want to chop up NBA, I'm happy to do that too. So I do really appreciate you coming onto the podcast, and again, I think this is really good for a lot of the viewers to hear about, and maybe helps them out in some way.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Yeah, yeah, anytime. I have a lot of free time right now, so I'd definitely like to do that at some point.
All right, for everybody, this is Shred Stakes, Mike Shredder with Alex Brodsky. Alex, thanks again for coming on to the show.
Thank you.